Today is Thursday, July 27, 2023, and this is Political Dharma with Alan Zundell. The topic for today's show returns once again to the problems of the Green Party. And in this case, I'm going to try to put it in a little more historical context to clarify the issues and the difficulties of resolving them. But first, before I go into that, I want to spend a little time updating you on some stories I've been covering and maybe preview what I intend to do in the future. So first of all, with Dr. Cornel West seeking the nomination for the Green Party, I've seen the chance for efforts being combined between those who are interested in an independent party in the Democratic Socialists of America and the Green Party's effort to mount a candidacy for Dr. West, who's a longtime affiliate of the Democratic Socialists of America. We have the upcoming DSA convention a week from now on the weekend of August 4th through 6th. I think that's Friday through Sunday. I talked to somebody, an insider, who has a better view of the national internal political situation of the DSA. And this person informed me that it did not appear to this person that my assessment was entirely accurate of the issues that are going to be prominent in the convention when they're trying to vote up and down these various resolutions and even electing a National Political Committee, which is the highest decision-making party in the DSA. This person said that they saw the main issue as one that's more or less one of an old guard of DSA members trying to hold on to positions and offices and make sure their friends and their affiliates, their allies, get into and hold on to similar positions. And there are other folks who think it's time to bring more people into the organization, bring up new leaders, and maybe try different directions. So essentially, it's a problem of democracy within the group that some people are clinging to power, other people want to loosen their hold on power, or whatever issues are in the background. My informant said this is the bigger one, and it didn't map, in their opinion, very well onto the real debates between what I call progressivism versus Marxism, which is really how accommodating the DSA should be towards progressives who are not socialists, such as working within the Democratic Party, and the debate over whether to actually stay working to elect people as Democrats or to make more moves towards creating an independent party. So I see opportunities for combining there, I and a lot of other people, and I've been covering that story. So DSA convention is something I'm going to be following, and I hope next week I can talk more, find out more, and then talk more about who's running for the National Political the National Political Committee, the NPC, in the DSA, and give you some sense of who is who and what is what. It'll take some time to look at it, and I've been pretty busy, so I'm not sure how well that'll come out, but I am attempting to tackle that next week. And then the following week, I'll be talking to somebody who is a delegate to the National Convention, giving us a debriefing on what happens at the convention. So the topic of DSA, I'm going to go forward with at least in the episode following the next, and hopefully in the next episode as well. Now, another topic I touched on earlier, just recently, it was the UFO revelations of David Grusch, who is an intelligence officer, or had been an intelligence officer with the Air Force and with a National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Yesterday, Wednesday, July 26, he appeared before the National Security Subcommittee of the House Committee on Oversight, the House Oversight Committee, and he testified under oath to the same things that have been reported in the news about what he brought to inspector generals of the intelligence agencies, which is that he learned of multi-decade effort of the Pentagon, essentially, and other military and security intelligence agencies in the U.S. government to retrieve pieces of crashes of UAFs, that is unidentified aerial phenomena, which is usually referred to as UFOs, unidentified flying objects, not a big difference in the names, that the government's been retrieving crash components, maybe including some kind of biological material from non-human entities of some sort, and that they've been providing this stuff to military contractors to do some reverse engineering with. And he specifically named, said there was misappropriation of funds by military contractors, overcharging the government, and then using those funds secretively to study these materials, this technology that the government has been holding, and perhaps, I don't think he said this, but this is my mind, create new forms of military weapons, new weaponry, and various other types of tools. The key thing here, though, and the reason I'm following this, not only because of the inherent interest in the idea of UFOs with possibly beings inside and better proof of such a thing, that's fascinating in its own right and invokes a lot of curiosity of people, but really I'm looking at it mostly from the standpoint of what this says about the US government, that not only are they conducting such a secret program from the public, but it's also been secret apparently from the presidents and from the members of the US Congress, our elected representatives for over a period of decades. So what does that say about our ability to trust whatever is going on in the Pentagon and intelligence agencies? Speaking for myself, my trust in those institutions was low to begin with, and it has been low for a long time. And I just see this as further evidence that our society is heading towards a possible totalitarian society where they're using any means available and secretive programs to conduct surveillance and to have means of repressing populations, such as technology that we help fund in Israel and import to other countries, and essentially create more of a totalitarian government. We're heading in that direction. I don't think it's just under the Republicans and Donald Trump either. I think the Democrats are in on this as well. And even more scary, not even the parties and elected people, it's people within the intelligence military complex who have their own agendas, perhaps. So that's why I'm covering that. I hope to take a look at David Grusch's testimony. There were 3 witnesses, including some pilots who saw very strange things in the sky. I'm not going to cover that so much as I'm going to take a look at David Grusch's testimony, see what we can glean from that, and probably have some clips from that. That is, if I can find time for it. Possibly next week, if I'm not able to get the DSA thing together, I might be doing the David Grusch thing. So we'll see. That's a preview on that particular topic, or I might drop it entirely because others are quicker and faster on this particular topic, and I'm really more focused on organizing for the values that I hold in the political realm. And I see an opportunity to do this in the Green Party and potentially with the cooperation of people within the DSA as well. So back to my original topic here, which is dysfunction in the Green Party and what we can do about it. Now, I recently rejoined my state party, the Pacific Green Party of Oregon, which I had been involved in. I left about 5 years ago after a few years of pretty intense involvement. My reason for leaving didn't have to do so much with dysfunction as I couldn't see a strategy going forward. I just couldn't see a way to really grow the party given the opportunities that we had in front of us. That changed when Cornel West decided to run for the nomination of the Green Party. Now I see all kinds of opportunities for organizing. So I rejoined the party, and as circumstances happen, there is right now an effort at the next convention of the state party in September to revise the bylaws and the organizational structure of our state party to be better, more functional, to sort out some of the problems we've had in the last several years and make it work better. So I want to return to that topic. About a month or maybe 5 weeks ago, I did a video on the topic of dysfunction in the Green Party and gave some of my views of it, particularly surrounding the question of leadership and grassroots democracy, concepts of grassroots democracy. 2 weeks ago, in my most recent episode, I interviewed Steve Welser of the editor of the Green Horizons magazine and a longtime member of the Green Party, who gave his rejoinder to my video, my original video, in which he said, you got to also look at the Green Party and say, look at how resilient it's been, that it's existed over decades, where other parties seem to fall by the waysides more quickly than that. So he attributed that to their focus on environmentalism, that it was because of that particular concern, which obviously is escalating as the climate crisis becomes more and more obvious, becomes a more visible and salient issue. It's in the face of people, so people are going to be more attracted to a party that's long been interested in topics of the environment and ecology. So that was his understanding of that. Now I think about this a little bit differently, and I also want to give a fuller view of what I see as some of the central problems that not only affect our state party here, but have affected parties, green parties throughout the United States for similar reasons, and have been inherent in the attempts to create a national party over the decades. Let me give you first a little story about how the Green Party of the United States got its beginnings. There was a previous organization which pretty much collapsed in order to make room for what we have now as the Green Party of the United States. It starts with really the movements of the 1960s and 1970s, a time of a lot of activism and social ferment. Some of these movements you're very familiar with. There was the civil rights movement and various other movements inspired by the Black civil rights movement, such as Chicano rights and Hispanic rights and gay rights. Women's rights in particular, the new wave of feminism of the late 60s, early 70s, the anti-war movement that derived a lot from the anti-nuclear movement that was a little earlier, and the pacifist objections to previous world wars, entry of the US into previous world wars. So the peace movement, the anti-war movement, the and an adherence to nonviolent direct action tactics. You had then in the 70s the environmental movement, and what all these had in common is that rather than being the inspiration of a particular organization or individual, there were movements that came from many sources responding to similar views and similar perceptions of needs in our society, and involved a lot of people. So there were mass movements rather than institutionalized. Of course, there were organizations that were involved in all these things, and organizations that came out of these movements, like the Students for a Democratic Society, the SDS, and the, of course, in civil rights, there's the Dr. Martin Luther King's, his organization, the Southern Leadership Council, and then there were others. So you get the idea that not only were there organizations, but they were not always at the center of this. Who was at the center of this is big parts of the public working together, really outside the electoral arena, to try to influence society and political decisions. Excuse me, for some reason my throat is going dry again. Once again. So these were movements, and in Europe, they began to coalesce. They went through a process, first of all, of using direct action tactics because they didn't feel like the main political parties, which were pretty well entrenched, not only in Europe, but in the United States. In the US, of course, we have the Republicans and Democrats. In Europe, they had more conservative parties and more Democratic Socialist parties, as well as several smaller parties. But the movements of the 60s and 70s at first attempted to do direct action tactics, and then they saw the need to change laws and regulations and things like that. So they targeted those, they lobbied, they used more traditional means of influencing government, and then they saw that the real way to change laws is to elect people to particular offices. So they began trying to support candidacies of people who reflected the views of many of these movements, and they saw that they would be more effective if they banded together with movements of similar orientation, most of them roughly what we would call on the left, although not in a socialist direction necessarily, although many were. And they saw, okay, we could create a party. We have enough different types of issues to attract people that have some coherence to them. And this coalesced into the Green Parties, what became known as Green Parties. In 1983, the West German Green Party was not the first to gain seats, but it was the most prominent because it gained about 24 seats in the West German parliament. And that was a big news because they were the first new party or third party to gain that kind of representation in their national parliament. It inspired some Americans who were following events in Germany and part of political movements here to want to attempt a similar thing in the United States. The first person who took the initiative to start a convention and talk with other people about the possibility of creating such a party was Charlene Spretnak, who was a professor and researched primarily in feminism and feminine-based spirituality. She got together a group of people to contact several organizations and ask them each to send 2 representatives to a meeting, and they would talk about the idea of forming a Green Party similar to ones in Europe and particularly in Germany. So this meeting convened. This would have been in 1984. One of the institutions that were contacted was the Institute for Social Ecology, which was an organization founded by Murray Bookchin. Murray Bookchin was a prominent author and activist who wrote primarily, and his activism was he was a communist originally, American communist, who migrated from the Communist Party to Trotskyite movements and then moved out of that towards anarchist socialism and became very interested in ecology. So he, at his heyday, was a libertarian socialist and an ecologist. He developed something called social ecology, and 2 representatives of his group were invited, but they sent 11 people to the meeting. So this is important for later in the story. Now, Murray Bookchin, he was strongly attached to his, at the time, where his philosophy was at. I don't think it changed much in the remaining years of his life. Very decentralized forms of social organization. He didn't want to have anything to do with especially national political parties, but political parties in general. He thought they should be creating alternative political institutions like municipal assemblies and very grassroots type democratic things. And this had resonance. People of the 60s like myself in the 70s were, now I am of my 70s, how about that? So anyway, young people of the 60s and 70s were already enculturated into this idea of trying to spread power to the people. That's where the real power lies. There had resonance with Bookchin. It was, of a somewhat older generation. Anyway, he sent a large contingent, and they vehemently argued against the idea of creating a political party and against the idea of any kind of centralized leadership for this new organization. They wanted it very decentralized, and that created some tension within the group because the original instigators, particularly Spretnak, but several others, had something different in mind. But of course, there's different views, and so as they came together. Now, these issues, I would boil them down to 2 that are still important today. One is the attitude toward electoral politics and alternative parties in a country which has a 2-party system buttressed by electoral laws and unfair advantages such as that. Is it even possible to have an effect with an alternative party, or is it forever consigned to marginal status, which would lead it to remain small and not very effective? That's one question. And I was surprised in researching this. Another plug for my book. I did research the early history of the Green Party of the United States, wrote a book called The Creation of the Green Party of the United States. You can look at that if you want more details on this story. Anyway, activism at the local level versus those who wanted to run for electoral office representing the various values of the movements of the 60s and 70s, and therefore had to create a more structured and even a centralized version of political parties. And that is, they had to adapt to the exigencies of our electoral laws and create state parties that had ballot access and designated officials at the state level. they had to adapt to that and form different types of things. So there's this tension over electoral politics, alternative parties, and centralization, decentralization. Those are two issues that kind of combine with each other, and is still present today in the sense that can we form models of internal decision-making for the Green Party that are very decentralized and have a different type of leadership involved? I don't know about parties in other states, how successful they've been. I know here in Oregon, it's still an issue and has been for a long time. Creating a successful model for that has been very difficult. All right. And the fact that it's an alternative political party in a two-party system. As I said, I didn't see much evidence of them even thinking about the obstacles of alternative parties in the United States among those who were dedicated to forming a new political party. The whole spoiler accusation, the difficulty of ballot access. Well, they did talk about ballot access and things like that, but not. They just seemed to assume that if they could win local offices and then move up to partisan offices at state level, and then they would be able to move into higher levels like Congress or whatever. That was the idea, until a little later they formed the idea, well, we need a presidential candidate to pull all this together. But you had two contingents. One that thought working through an alternative party was viable and sensible, and another contingent that was very skeptical, not only of parties, but electoralism. That still tears the party apart. The dilemma of trying to combine those two types of orientations in a successful manner. So leadership issues, democracy issues, party issues. But I also want to take note of this one, which is the problem of entryism. Entryism is when a group organizes independently of a political party or other institution for that matter, with a different agenda from the larger body. They enter into a larger institution, like a political party, with their own agenda and try to hijack it by stacking the deck at meetings, by getting people elected to offices, by gaining control of resources like membership lists and publications and treasury funds, and use the platform of the party to elevate their voices. So entryism is a particular problem for smaller parties because it's much easier to stack the deck because they're smaller. If you get enough people to a national convention or to some kind of meeting, then you could gain control of the agenda of the party and promote your own views. Now, in a sense, that's what Murray Bookchin's group from the Institute of Social Ecology did, although they were largely in sympathy with the values of the other people who formed the early formation of the Green Party. They didn't call it the Green Party at the time because there were people who didn't want it to be a party, and they were like leery about the term green as well for reasons that don't come back to me right at the moment. Read my book and you'll find out why. But this entryism problem still exists today. That is, not only because it stays small, but because there's this cycle of having opportunities to gain a lot of attention and new members, and then a decline after that when new people come into the party over the excitement of a particular candidate or a situation that seems promising for a new party. People come in, they're excited, they're disillusioned after they feel like they didn't get anywhere for all their work and trouble, and the party shrinks again, and then it becomes vulnerable once again to entryism from small groups that can organize independently to take over a larger group and their various resources. In one way or another, that still happens today, although it's not necessarily an outside group. It can be a group within a party who has a somewhat different agenda from the one that's been set previously, and they try to organize within the party to take it over. So these are three problems that I see as unresolved. The first one is, how do you form a party that's based on the idea of spreading power out more widely instead of centralizing it? How do you overcome the obstacles to a third party? And how do you overcome the hijacking of a party's agenda when it's small enough that it's easy for a small group to take it over? This question of parties was a contentious one for the first 10 years or so of the groups that were attempting to form the Green Party. And in fact, John Resenbrink actually created the first state party in the United States, but that was back before this first national convention. It was back in January of 1984, the year after the German Greens won seats to the parliament. John Resenbrink of Maine, who was a professor and a political activist, he also helped edit my book at the time I was writing it. He died almost a year ago exactly, in August of 2022. He found out that he had been excluded from this founding convention, even though somebody that was supposed to be inviting people knew of the existence of the main Green Party. They didn't invite them to the national convention to create a Green Party, simply because he had a party. And at least that's the suspicion. I think it's a well-founded suspicion that he would be a pro-party person, obviously, because he created a party. He became involved in the national organization, and he advocated vigorously for becoming a political party. That fight between the anti-party and the pro-party people went on for over a decade, until finally some people in various states just kind of either ignored the existing organization while remaining members, or they just departed from the existing organization and started to organize state parties. 1990, Alaska was the first one that successfully created a state party with ballot access, and it was followed in 92 by a few others, most prominently including California, the most populous state in the United States. So it took from that initial meeting of 1984 all the way up until the early 90s before state parties began to form, and several years later for a national party to begin to coalesce, which eventually became the Green Party of the United States and was officially recognized as such by the to nominate candidates in the name of the party by the federal government. So I want to return at the end here to first the question of resilience. Steve Welser, when I interviewed him, thought that the problem was not the problem, but the resilience of the Green Party over the years had mainly to do with their commitment to ecology and environmentalism. I would say more than that. It became a mass party in a sense. It became a fairly large, it attracted a lot of people from various orientations because it was rooted in several movements, not only the environmentalist or ecological movement, but civil rights and feminism and anti-war. That's where the four pillars come from. The four pillars that characterize Green parties around the world are nonviolence, which has to do with direct action tactics and being against military, unnecessary military interventions and those types of things. So nonviolence, grassroots democracy, social justice, and the fourth one, ecology, ecological wisdom. Those are the four pillars reflecting the various values of those movements. So it combined a lot of movements. It wasn't simply focused on one ideology, like say a socialist party would be. It had a variety of views in it, so it could create more of a source of attraction for people, not only of the time, but of various commitments in movement politics. I think that's the secret of its resiliency, that it tapped the mood of the time in a variety of areas that are still with us today as important areas in politics, but not well represented by either of the major political parties. Now, why hasn't the Green Party grown, and why does it have such internal dysfunction? Steve contended that it was just human conflicts, typical to any organization, and that you have to accept that that's there and do your best to try to resolve them. I credited it to, I talked to somebody in the Green Party here. That's where this idea came from. That was the internal organizational structure, which a lot of people say, and I do think is part of the problem. But larger than that, it's the environment that the party exists within, the two-party system. Anytime the party grows is due to circumstances largely beyond its control. You take the times of greatest growth was when they had candidates that were fairly effective, like Ralph Nader was well known, and Jill Stein, who did fairly well for the party in 2016, and not quite as well in 2012, but better than the previous two between Nader and Stein. Not only did they have candidates who were pretty good, which is somewhat in control of the party, but the larger political contest was different. You had unpopular candidates like Bush versus Gore in 2000. Neither one of them was particularly popular. And of course, in 2016, when Stein did fairly well, you had Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was not the most beloved Democratic politician of our times. So there was the opportunity and then a fairly effective candidate that allowed some excitement in the electoral arena, even though, the party never did terribly well in terms of numbers of votes, but allowed the party to grow and new people to come into it. But then inevitably, there's the sense that there's accusations of being a spoiler because you don't get anything for all your work. You don't even get one seat in the Congress. You just get the accusation that you ruin things for the Democrats, who are supposedly at least a little bit towards your side on some of the positions, even though they're largely against your positions in most of the important areas. So there's this cycle of, excitement and then disillusionment as they bump into the limits of a two-party system, and then a decline in growth, which leaves it open to contention over these unresolved issues like, what's an effective strategy for a party, and how do we create a grassroots organization that has some coherent leadership to unify the party. Those issues are still with us. I'm going to be trying to help find a successful formula for getting the party to work better here in Oregon, at least during the time I'm still in Oregon, which I don't know how long that will be, and prepare for Cornell West candidacy, in which case I expect to see another boom of interest in the Green Party. And in my mind, this is not about, and I've said this in my previous episodes, it's not about simply educating the public on issues, and it's not about trying to move the Democratic Party more in your direction. It's about having an opportunity to organize people around issues that are not being addressed by the major parties. You have to organize people to understand these things and to be ready for opportunities to do something about them, whether it's in the electoral arena or elsewhere. And I think where we're going is in a period of continual crises with climate change and the financial instability of our system. Anyway, the threat of nuclear war again. Okay, so I'm going over time once again. That is my little wrap today on the Green Party and why it's been resilient and why it still has problems and how those are built in to our political system, and some of them are not easy to overcome. Thanks for listening. Glad to hear any feedback you might have, and we'll be looking forward to looking more closely at the Democratic Socialists of American convention. Oh, by the way, also on the Green Party convention, which is the same weekend as the DSA convention. It's not really a convention. It's what they call an annual meeting. They have this once every year, except in the presidential year, in which they have a convention to choose their presidential nominee. But these meetings on the off presidential election year are mostly about things like workshops and listening to speakers and seeing films and schmoozing with other Green and meeting some of the office holders who have won office as Greens or candidates for upcoming elections, that kind of stuff. It's more, networking and informational than making decisions that are going to affect the presidential race. I wasn't clear on that before. I think I'm pretty clear on that now. So that's an update on that convention as well. Hope you come back and listen to upcoming videos. I better quit now. Thanks. Bye.
I see the chains are breaking. We gained our focus. The moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.